everyone. I'm so sorry that videos have unfortunately have to be delayed up until today because I've been relatively busy and the annoyance of the technical issues has been so great. I've been trying to get the volume to work and now it finally works. It kind of goes in and out of working for some reason, so I will be caught up by the end of today. So without further ado, let me address what I wanted to address for this particular what I would have done Thursday, and that is the film Garbage Pail Kids. Now, Garbage Pail Kids is probably considered to be one of the worst movies out there. I mean, probably one of the top. I mean, if you probably look at lists that are on the internet, this is probably up there. And I think there's definitely good reason to assume as to why it would be up there because it just offers a very kind of just strange and almost disturbing perspective, or at least perspectives that the film tries to get across. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of dive into this movie and sort of discuss what I would have done to ultimately improve it so that maybe it wouldn't be on the worst of the worst of movies out there. Now, I think what this film starts off with, is the cliche among cliches. And this is the bullies who are one-dimensional. And they are present in this entire movie as the predominant villains, at least, or antagonists. And that, I think, definitely needs to be altered. And what I think they could have done is, and the strange thing is too, is that the kids, at least the bullies, they look like they're in their 20s or in their late teens. And then the main character, whose name is Dodger, looks like he's 12 or something. So I think you needed to provide the same age range, at least if you're trying to set up the idea that there's bullies within this film. Because I think that would have probably worked out for the better. And also, I think you could have emphasized the fact that maybe Dodger lives in a bad side of town or neighborhood. Maybe he even lives in an orphanage with these kids, or comes across these kids. Because they live in a bad neighborhood along with him, and maybe they take his money, because at one point they do take his money within the actual film, but if instead they took his money because the parents are trying to kind of force them to do the work for them, something like that, I could see that being actually something that's a little bit more dimensional in character. I mean, obviously what they're doing is not right, but I think it would have provided a little bit more perspective. And if they are poor, then it only makes sense that they would kind of, I guess, unfortunately sometimes be delved into bad behavior, or at least doing bad things. So I think that would have at least worked well. Have the kids be in an environment that's that's basically in the slums, they're or in maybe some big metropolitan city, and basically Dodger's kind of just a good orphan kid trying to get by, and then there's these bullies that bully him constantly and take his money. And so you could see he's kind of down on his luck, and he doesn't have really a home or family. But he does have Garbage Pail Kids cards. Now, the way this movie was presented, it was presented initially as, and again, they don't even give Dodger parents. You don't even really exactly know whether he's an orphan or not. He's just there. So, I mean, at least I would have given that a label. But it is emphasized that this movie was based off of trading cards that were basically the characters of the Garbage Pail Kids. Now, what I think could have happened, or could have been a good start to this whole story, is that Dodger finds these trading cards that are of all of the different Garbage Pail Kids characters. And he finds these cards, and he figures, these are these are a cool collectible or something, and or another, and he kind of maybe they're like there's like certain rules maybe on, and maybe it's like a game, too. You can make it as like um, it's maybe like a Go Fish sort of thing, where you have the different characters and you try to pair them up or something like that. And also, I think uh, had he stumbled upon those somehow, and they somehow came to life, I think that would have worked better, especially if you're considering to have a kid as your main protagonist. Usually, those kinds of scenarios I think work out fairly well. If they just come out of a kid stumbling across something and then it creates something that he didn't even imagine could happen. And I think that's kind of, and when you see a lot of these, a lot of these scenarios that are played out, they usually play out fairly well. So I think that could have worked. And not only would I've definitely given the Garbage Pail Kids at least some kinds of personalities, which they definitely needed, and they did not have within this film, I think making them as protagonists is something that's fairly hard to do because they're not the most pleasantest of creatures, to say the least, or kids. I guess you could say they're kids, but they're more like creatures within the film. Um, so I think what could have been done is instead they could have been antagonists. Maybe they come to life, Dodger freaks out, and then they run away. Um, and maybe Dodger does something with these cards, like maybe he puts them in a certain way, and then they somehow come to life or something like that. I think that would have added at least some kind of context and value, because you're bringing in the whole concept of which the Garbage Pail Kids were based off of. So they come to life, but they're not really good. They're bad. And so they run away, and it's sort of up to Dodger to go and find all of these Garbage Pail Kids and basically kind of bring them back to where they were, which is basically in the cards or whatnot. And for the love of God, they did not need to have a song. Get rid of the Garbage Pail Kids song. That was not necessary. So again, I think that would have at least worked. And you could have made the Garbage Pail Kids kids that kind of cause all these different forms of mischief, and they sort of use their grossness in their mischievousness. And I don't think you necessarily had to make them like complete utter out murderers or mean, or to the point where they're kind of like serial killers. You didn't need to go, I think, that far, but you could emphasize the fact that they cause a lot of mischief and problems, and they kind of are a huge burden onto at least the area in which Dodger lives in. And at one point, eventually the bullies could have, I think, turned around and not have necessarily been the antagonists anymore. Maybe one of theirs is captured, and they sort of side with Dodger to get this one particular person out of the clutches of the Garbage Pail Kids. You could have done something like that too, because that would have been, I think, another big motivator and a driving force for the plot. And they sort of side with each other, and you kind of, the bullies kind of become a little bit more sympathetic and tell their story, and of how they are, they're not everything's not all pleasant from where they're from and whatnot. And it would have given them more reason to be rude to Dodger, and Dodger could be sympathetic and forgiving to them. So I think that could have worked out well and would have led to, I think, at least some character development there. And and then Dodger somehow defeats the Garbage Pail Kids along with the other bullies' help, and that's the end of it. I don't think you needed to make it as complex. And they did really try to, at certain points, they didn't make it have anything, they didn't have anything going on, and then all of a sudden they would have like this whole state home for the ugly, and I think that could have just been completely scrapped. You did not need such a stupid idea. All you needed was to have these annoyances come to life, be annoyances, and have the protagonist try to stop them. That's ultimately, I think, all that really needed to um, be presented here as far as a Garbage Pail Kids movie. Um, and again, I don't think they needed to go full on horror film. I don't think they needed to go around, behaving like Chucky. But at the same time, I think they could have, they could have caused a decent amount of mischief. Maybe they accidentally kill people or something like that, something that's a little bit more kiddish, or at least not as threatening, but still villainous and sinister in nature. I think that could have played itself off well, actually. Because I don't think they could be. I just don't see them as usually. I don't really see these kinds of characters as really protagonists, especially when they do actually end up causing a lot of mischief within the original film that they're in. So, but yeah, that's really what I would have done. I mean, it's this one was definitely a tough one. I mean, I've been debating on whether to even talk about this particular film because it is just so bad, and I don't see how it could be redeemed. But I think with what I came up with, I think it could have lended itself a lot better. Um, but that's just my honest thoughts and opinions. I'd be more than happy to hear yours. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. But I think that's ultimately all I can say what I would have done with this film. But until next time, everybody, bye bye.